And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome Joel Schwartzberg. How are you, Joel?
I'm doing well. It's my pleasure to be here, Tony.
It's a very interesting time that we face currently still within the world, and there's and the area that you've specialised in and that going to talk about today is an area of communication. And I think that's sadly one of those areas that we've seen as being very ambiguous and very anxious and anxiety causing as we've pummeled our way through this pandemic.
Right.
But before we get started into that, just to share a little bit about the Joel Schwartzberg story.
Right. Well, the Joel Schwartzberg story, and I won't make it long because I like to get to the point and I encourage that. So I want to both talk the talk and walk the walk. But it begins when I was in middle school. I actually did competitive speech and debate, and I began to learn what it takes to succeed in the form of communication and conveying ideas. And I continued that for about 11 years straight until I was a senior in college. At that point, I was a national champion. This is a competitive arena in certain events. And later, I became a coach for several universities. University of Pennsylvania, Seton Hall University, in the Northeast. And Tony, I thought that was the end at that point. You know, it was fun while it lasted, as if I did basketball or played chess or something like that. But then one of big two aha moments came. And the first aha moment came at this point when I realized that when I interviewed for jobs, when I went to conferences, when I spoke to direct reports or talked to a boss, even when I just simply conveyed ideas at a meeting, I was leveraging a lot of the skills I learned throughout all those years in competition and as I coached them. And that's when I thought, I can share what I've learned for all kinds of people, whether you are a leader or an aspiring leader, whether you're an intern, a job applicant. Everyone needs to communicate effectively. The second aha moment came for me. Now, I've been teaching public speaking for roughly 16 years now. And about 3 years into it, I realized that while I was coaching people on the basic stuff you would expect, if you Googled public speaking skills, how to have good eye contact, how to speak with authority, how to gesture, keep your feet in place. But when I asked my clients and students what their point was of their presentations, they would come back to me with something that was not a point. It was a theme or a notion or an idea or a category or a catchphrase. And that's when I sort of changed the trajectory of my coaching and my business writing, because that's fundamental. I mean, it is a little cliche, but if you do not have a point, you're rendered pointless. So as I explored this and coached this, I wrote a book in 2017 called Get to the Point. And then I wrote a book, I almost said this year, but last year in 2021, called The Language of Leadership, which applies the ideas behind Get to the Point and puts them in the framework of how to be a leader who engages and inspired their teams.
Wow. It is such a simple concept that when we talk to an audience or when we talk to a team or when we're talking to individuals, that there is something that we want to share with them, that there is a point that we want to get. And I find that fascinating. And while you were speaking, I was sort of visualizing that in my world. There are many times, I guess, that I talk and I'm talking to a theme more so to a point.
Right.
And generally, I see that in a lot of leaders as well. There's a theme that they want to get across, which is particularly different. So tell me, so what's the point, I guess, in getting to the point and identifying what this point is? Right.
Let me help you visualize it with an example, a very recent example. I was working with a CEO who wanted to speak on the theme of resilience. The organization was resilient through the course of the pandemic. But that was not that word. Resilience is a theme. His point was, because we were so resilient, we were able to maintain our course of business and achieve a level of success. See, now that's an argument. I'm going to show you why resilience was critical to our achieving success. That's the point I want to leave you with, not just this broad theme of resilience. And I have a test that I use all the time, and it's in my first book, and it's very simple. And if you don't mind, I'd love to share it with you.
Yeah, please.
And it's called the I Believe That test. And it goes like this. you take what you think is the point of your presentation, whether it's to a conference of 100 people or just at a morning meeting where you just want to share a big idea or propose or suggest something. So it should be one sentence at the start. Now put the words "I believe that" in front of it. If you then have a complete sentence, then you are on your way to making a point. But if you do not have a complete sentence, then you need to reimagine it so that it becomes a point. So for example, I believe that podcasting, not a complete sentence, not a point. I believe that the value of podcasting, not a complete sentence, not a point. I believe that the evolution of podcasting. I believe that the strength of podcasting. None of these are complete sentences. So it forces you to say something like, I believe that podcasting is the best way to reach a valuable millennial audience. Complete sentence, and that's a point that sort of makes the audience or your teams and employees sit up and say, go on.
Yeah.
I want to hear how this mechanism will enable us to reach this level of success.
How many points should someone have? So for an example, while you were talking then and working through your examples, I've actually got a free webinar happening next week, which will be, when this podcast comes out, unfortunately, it'll be history. And I'm thinking to myself, have I made the point of what I want to get across in this particular webinar? So the webinar is about mindset and the definition and strategies around success mindsets, for example. Right. So how many points should a webinar or a quick meeting or should it just be the one, or is there a minimum of three? Or because we often hear people say you need to have three takeaways.
There is a magic number. There were two answers to the question. I'm not trying to hedge it, but one answer is there's always one big point, because often audiences will remember only one idea. They'll take away. Think of all the times you've sat through a speech or a seminar, and maybe you came away with one or two really practical ideas. So always know your first ideas. You can begin with, through a variety of methods and examples, I'm going to prove to you this one idea. And you could end with, so you can see there's a universe of concepts here and advantages, but if there's one idea I want you to leave with, here's the thing. It's this one idea. Now you can have several sub-ideas in there. We're going to look at how this new approach is going to be both more effective, but also more efficient. And enable us to save money. But look at how I delineated those. Imagine a CEO said, we have a new approach, everyone, and this approach is going to make us more efficient, effective, super, relevant, memorable, supreme, economic, feasible, futuristic. Obviously, this is a mistake, because who can remember all these descriptors? And even if you could, if you have a photographic memory, you don't know the priority I'm putting on any of them because I'm throwing them out there. So what I say is, obviously, we know 3 is better than 7. What I would suggest is that 1 is even better than 3. I often say if you say a lot of things, your audience will remember none. If you say some, they'll remember some. If you say 1, they will remember all.
Okay. There's a real art to public speaking, isn't there? And I see that you've got quite a distinguished career in that realm. And, even just the use of pauses and silence in a public speaking world is just phenomenal. I saw a lady once. She was a distinguished Toastmaster, and she made a point about her father, and then she's silenced, and she walked across this timber stage with high heel shoes, and all you could hear is step, step, step. Allowed it all to sink in, and then she kicked back in, which I just found incredibly powerful. And I suppose I'm leading into the point that communication has got so many aspects of it, especially when we're talking about leadership and we're talking about the world of business. We're talking about written, we're talking about email, we're talking about
videos,
presentations. So how does getting to the point work in all of those aspects?
So once we realize that we have a point, we pass the I believe that test, we know the argument, and usually it will be, you'll know it's a point because it's a proposal, it's a recommendation, it's an idea you're trying to convey, it's a suggestion. Now we're getting to a point where how do I sharpen it and how do I champion it? And to piggyback on something you just said, two factors that make a difference to me. One is pausing and one is volume. But let's not take them at face value. I mean, pausing adds drama. It creates suspense. These are all good things. But here's the number one reason pausing helps us. It allows our mind to work ahead of our mouth. Sometimes as a speaker, we're putting our mouths ahead of our mind, blah, 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 blah. And our mind is saying, wait, Joel, wait, Tony. I want to put these in the right order. I want to pick the right words so I could make my point clear. That will only happen if you slow down, and slowing down will only happen when you pause, because you're giving your mind time to put your mind ahead of your mouth. You are also creating crucial time for your audience to understand and comprehend what you're saying. Because think about it. If you're the speaker, you've thought about it, you've written it down, you've practiced it, you're an expert in it. Now think of the audience. They're hearing it for the first time. So whereas all you need to do is say it, they need to hear it for the first time, listen to it, make sense of it. How does this apply to my work? Should I write this down? Should I tweet this? Meanwhile, you're 6 sentences down the road, maybe some important 6 sentences. So pausing also gives your audience time to digest what you're saying. My rule of thumb is your audience needs 3 times as much time to digest what you're saying as you need to say it.
Wow. That's a very nice formula. I often, when I've spoken on stage, I've just been in almost such a hurry to get it over and done with.
Right.
And then I've always... And of course, that minimizes then the impact that you can have with people, which is really quite challenging for someone that actually wants to make an impact.
Yeah, and sometimes, let's say we're doing a PowerPoint proposal. Sometimes when you have more slides than time, the response in your brain is sort of, I got to speed up. Well, that's the wrong response, because then your audience will get none of it because they won't be able to process it. So I say always cut slides. Don't speed up to create that time, because you know your audience is only going to take away 2 or 3 things anyway, and you can reinforce those 2 or 3 things at the end of your presentation.
Which is another fault a lot of people have. They want to jam as much information as they can, thinking that they're doing the right thing, when fundamentally that the concept of less is more is probably the better way to think about it.
Right. And another point based on what you just said, Tony, is a lot of times leaders will come at it by saying, what do I want to say? What do I need to say? What do I feel like saying? These are the wrong questions, because you're not taking into account your job, which is to impact the audience. So the right question is, what does my audience want and need to know? And those are 2 separate things. Want to know is something that they're aware of, but they want more elaboration about. Need to know is something they may not be aware of and need to be enlightened about. But in either case, you start with what they want and need to know, then you work backwards to program what you want to say. That's the way to make sure that you're making a connection and saying something that they will find relevant.
So what about emails, Joel? How do we make a point in an email?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I train a lot of people to make successful points when they speak. And in many cases, when they write, when they post or write a blog, and then it all goes out the window when they write an email. And if there are a few basic things I talk about, it all starts with the subject line. Something that makes my skin crawl is when someone has something very important to share, to propose, to suggest a huge point, and the subject line says, Thursday. Because it's part of a thread that started a week ago and nobody bothered to change the subject line. And that idea could be a game changer, but someone else is going to delete it or at least put it off because they're thinking, that's an old thread. So what I starts with the subject line. Put in the subject line your point. Idea to facilitate our process. Sometimes I put for review in all caps, : if I want something to review something.
Okay.
I'll put urgent in all caps, : when something is urgent. I do everything I can in that subject line to make the recipient realize the value of that email. And then as we get into the body, a lot of the things I talk about in good speech making apply. Not only less is more, but more is less. You don't want to write an encyclopedia. We've all gotten emails where it's basically like a book, and we stop reading. So here's a good rule of thumb, and I like to share really specific nickel and dime kind of tactics here, and here's one. In an email, no paragraph longer than 3 sentences. I write a lot of paragraphs that are 1 sentence, many that are 2, but I never go over 3. And it sounds like a challenge, but if you try it, you'll find it's not a challenge, and it will enable you to actually separate and organize your own thoughts, in addition to making those thoughts very easy to digest and to pull out for your audience. So use bullets, use numbers, break up those paragraphs, include only the most important information, and make sure you end with an action step. Let's have a meeting. I'm going to follow up with this person. Can we present this to the group? That's how you give an email life so that it continues on.
Yeah, excellent points. And, we've all seen those threads, haven't we? And I get lost in them, to be completely honest, as I'm sure many other people do. And you're trying to work out which is the most recent, which is the most relevant. In so many ways, emails have gone so far forward that we've actually gone backwards in trying to understand them.
Sometimes there's a note that'll say, down in the thread at the bottom of someone's email, by the way, Tony, can you do this? How are you supposed to spot that? I always like to, when I use someone's name in a to-do, I bold it, I make it bigger, I change the color, because it's your job as the writer. You have the burden of making sure it's easily understood. You don't want to transfer that burden to the person who's getting the email.
Yeah. Tell me, how does all this work? So we're talking about how we want to influence people, how we want to be more effective. How does it work if I've got some bad news or a performance issue that I've got to address? How can we utilize what your specialty, your expertise in those situations?
When you have bad news to share, some key attributes come to mind, or some key approaches and mindsets. The first of which is clarity. You want to be very, very clear and very honest from the first point. You may think you're sugarcoating something or putting off something that people don't want to hear because you delay it or you bury the lead, as they say in journalism. But what you're actually doing is creating a bad kind of suspense. People really want to know right away what the information is so they can use it and make sense of it. The other thing is to be very brief because people want the information not clouded. They don't want people to ramble through it. They want to get the information right away so they can begin processing it. Another tip I say is don't dwell on the negative. If you are a leader, you are like a boat captain. Let's pretend you're on a boat and it's taking on water and you're the captain. Do people want to hear about how much water is coming into the boat? How many buckets we have left to get the water out? No, we want to hear about the plan to get to dry land. And that is what people are looking for leadership to do. Convey the vision of how we're going to get out of this mess or how we're going to address it. But here's clarity on the situation, on what we're doing. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you, for your benefit, or for my benefit, to make it easier for me to feel less guilty about what I'm sharing.
So when you were talking about the I believe that statement, so if I'm doing a presentation to a team or a group, or I'm on a stage and I'm doing public speaking, do I start my speech or my presentation with that statement?
Your point does not start until you start making it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to start with I believe that we should do this. And by the way, when I say I believe that, I don't mean to say you have to use those 3 words. If you do, you're putting your reputation, your stake behind it. It's a good thing. But it's merely a test. But sometimes we have an icebreaker. If you're funny, and I make that very clear, if you're not funny, don't start with a joke. If you are funny, you could start with a joke. But to tell you the truth, what's more effective than any joke is a good story. This is something funny my kids said this morning, which relates to our focus today. Or I read something in the newspaper that I want to share with you before we begin. But understand those are icebreakers. You're humanizing yourself. You're warming people up. But you are not beginning to make your point until you give that I believe that statement. So get in and get out of that icebreaker quickly welcome people, thank people who are necessary to thank, but then say, I'm going to talk to you today about why I believe that this particular approach is going to take us to the next level of success in several ways.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a movie where you want to hide the ending and don't want to spoil it in the beginning. It's not fiction. There's no reason to hide it. In fact, not only do you want to get it out early, you want to get it out as often as possible. Because if there's anything you want your audience to extract and leave with, it's your point. So in the middle, as you're going through slides, here's another, this data again proves why this approach will be successful. And then at the very end, your last opportunity to leave your audience with that point. Sometimes you say in conclusion, or sometimes the thing is, or sometimes here's the one thing I hope you take away from this. That is that I've proven that this approach will lead to the kind of success we're looking for and set us up for success in the future.
So it's like getting to the point, making the point, reinforcing the point, and then summarizing the point.
Right. Because the point is the gift. So nobody ever comes away from a presentation saying, you know, Tony was fantastic, but he kind of made his point too many times. And the reason for that is that's the thing of value. That's what you're working to get them. Not a detail, not a statistic, not a graph, not even a story. All those things are supportive of the big idea, which is your point.
Yeah. Yeah, and as opposed to Tony made it, what was the point of Tony speaking?
Right.
You'd much rather than walk away saying, I think I got that. I think he mentioned it 8 times, but I think I got it. So.
This is why I counsel people away from thinking, when I ask them, well, what's your goal with this presentation? Well, my first goal is I don't want to screw up. My second goal is I want people to think of me as a great public speaker. To which I say, neither of those are your goals. Because why do you want people come away, they don't know your point, but they think you're a great public speaker? Are they in charge of getting you more public speaking gigs? No. Your goal wasn't to impress someone with you. Your goal was to be like a bicycle delivery person, to merely deliver your point. That's why we say we deliver a speech. We don't perform a speech. And in fact, sometimes this makes people less nervous when they realize they're not a magician or a person who tells jokes or a beauty pageant contestant. You are a delivery person. So it's not about this, how white your teeth are, the shirt you chose to wear today. It's not about you even. It's about the point that you want to deliver effectively to your audience.
So much to take away, so much to dissect. And, you know, even just personally, it's I certainly do myself fall into that habit of just trying to get so much information into people thinking I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
And, you know, just to be able to utilize and look at it in a different way. I know that from now on, some of the takeaways that I've taken is that I'm going to be putting it there whenever I do a video or a live stream. One of the first things I'm going to write down is what's the point. Right. So I think that you've already had an amazing impact just for myself, and I thank you so much for that.
Good, it's my pleasure.
So who's inspired you in your journey to get to where you are?
It's an interesting question. When people ask me the public speakers I look up to, it's the ones who sort of make decisions that help them make their point. One of them is Michelle Obama, probably my favorite public speaker in almost any context, because she scaffolds her information in such a way that uses all the great argument-making techniques. She uses passion. She makes an intelligent argument. She justifies the information. She uses data. And really, you know, Aristotle would be very proud. And it leads to one big idea. But I'll tell you the truth, sometimes I see the best presentations coming from entertainers. When I see a speech at an awards ceremony and someone makes a point about how, let's say it's a famous female singer. She may say to the audience, you can be where I am today if you apply yourself, if you believe in your talent, and you take every opportunity you can. Sometimes it's that simple. So I don't think about the great public speakers in history when I think about great public speaking models. I think about the universe of people who are making points in a small way or in a big way. And every day I see this happening, whether it's my client, whether it's a politician, an entertainer, a leader. And I try to write those down so I keep track of it. And again, the thought process is not what made them a great speaker, but what decisions did they make to make sure that I extracted their key point.
So it's really firmly in the, I guess, the preparation for every time we speak that you really want to be working through some of those steps and how you're going to support it, qualify it, whatever the process is. So, Joel, communication is obviously something that every leader should be conscious of and should be looking to develop.
Right.
What are some of those other traits that you see in great leaders today?
One of them, my specialty is in communication. And one of the reasons I wrote The Language of Leadership is because you could throw a rock in a bookstore and you would get books telling leaders they should be more honest, they should be more empathic, they should be better, be amongst their community, they should have this and do that and do that. And the reason I wrote The Language of Leadership is because how do people and teams and employees realize those qualities of their leaders? Is it telepathy? Is it performative dance? No, it's communication. So I always focus on communication, but communication isn't always going outward. Sometimes it's going inward. So I'll answer your question with one really important quality, and that's the quality of active listening. Good leaders spend time listening to their people. It goes back to what we were saying earlier, Tony, about you need to know what your audience wants and needs in order to construct the presentation that will be relevant to them. Well, how are you going to know what they want and need without listening to them? So active listening means not listening thinking, what am I going to say next? Really, truly listening, writing it down, asking probing questions. And one of the tactics I give to leaders when they're listening is the value of the nod. So when you hear your team and you smile, that says you're entertaining me or amusing me. When you clap, that means you've come to the end. Good for you. But when you nod to someone who's presenting, you are saying, I am buying what you're selling. I am receiving your point. So for me, the most valuable thing a leader can do while they're active listening is to nod. It's very, very supportive of the presenter.
And once again, just body language, looks on the
eye contact,
facial expressions, eye contact, all of those things go into the communication bucket, so to speak.
Right.
But nodding while someone's speaking, it gives them the impetus to keep going too, I guess, doesn't it?
Very, very supportive. Yeah, it really helps. Even if someone is insecure, when I am watching someone who's a little insecure about public speaking, I nod a lot. Because that's the best way to show them that they are succeeding in their job, which again is not being a great public speaker, but in conveying an idea in such a way that I receive it successfully.
Joel, how do you deal with failure? Because I'm guessing that you just weren't born as a great communicator.
Right, nobody is, right.
And I'm guessing that there was a number of times that you've come off a stage or a presentation and you thought to yourself, what happened there? That was horrendous, or what have you. So how do you, tell me about your relationship with failure?
Well, you have to, it's almost trite to say it, but there is no failure. There's only learning. So you have to learn from those moments. And I'm going way back here, but when I used to do competition, one of my first competitions, I had a joke in one of my speeches and it fell flat. And the audience kind of groaned and, they put their thumbs down. These are school children, of course. And it really threw me for a loop. And one of the things I learned from that is I need to somehow develop a way to have confidence in the points that I'm making, even if I'm getting the wrong signals from an audience. This is especially true on Zoom. When someone is not paying attention on Zoom, maybe it's because of you, or maybe it's because their dog is messing up in the corner, or they have a child who is not eating their lunch, or there's something going on in the perimeter. So one of the things I learned was not making assumptions based on what's going on in the environment. But the truth is we're all on learning journeys. This is a skill and not a talent. Everybody, if they make the right decisions if they have true points, can succeed on their own level. This is not leveled where everybody needs to be Michelle Obama or needs to be at a CEO level. You need to be the most successful and effective presenter you can be. And when you look at it in that context, there isn't a lot of room for failure because you can see and visualize what you want to do. There is a lot of room for failure if you set out saying, I need to be the next Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
You're going to fail. And you're not Steve Jobs. And by the way, Steve Jobs couldn't give the speech you're about to give because he doesn't know what you're talking about. So I try to keep people contained in the world of their ability. That will leave little room for error. Because my job, and I just said this to someone today, my job is to make your presentational opportunity easier for you. There's a good chance you're making it harder on yourself. You're putting pressure on yourself. You're thinking, what should I wear? You're writing out your speech word for word, which I discourage 99 out of 100 times. Instead of thinking, I have one idea to get across. How can I do that? Easier.
So you've just intrigued me again, Joel, because one of the things we've talked about is preparing, for the conversation. But then in the next breath, you're saying that you discourage people writing out their speech. Walk me through that. How should they prepare?
Right. There are a lot of peril. There's a lot of peril to writing a speech word for word. For one thing, you end up reading to your audience. And there's a huge difference between reading and presenting. Reading gets more into performance. I'm going to perform this manuscript for you in such a way that hopefully it will impress you. It's also easy to lose your place. And for me, it's for the most part, unless you're a CEO working with teleprompters or a politician, it is against the idea of what presentation is all about. I want to look you in the eye and explain to you why my point will have value to you and your work. The best way for me to do that is to use notes as they should, not as a bunch of words that I need to run through, but a short list of ideas that I want to make sure I hit. In other words, the best notes remind you of the things you might otherwise forget. Write your point out. You're going to forget Taylor Swift's name, like I forgot when I was talking about a female singer. Then I'll write down Taylor Swift, or a number, or a statistic. I'll write down the 3 ideas I want to get across, including the story that support my point. I often say really good speaking notes are like the list you bring to the supermarket. And the list you bring to the supermarket, number 3 doesn't say, go to aisle 4, lift up a head of cabbage, examine it for brown spots, shake it, put it in a bag, and put it in your cart. No, it just says cabbage. Because you know the rest. But the one thing you didn't want to forget was cabbage. So make sure that your speaking notes do the same thing. Reminding you what you want to say, prompting you, but enabling you to look your audience in the eye and make that case, make that point without relying on a script.
Excellent. Excellent. What's the vision for you moving forward, Joel?
My personal vision is, people in IT, like when I say this, I consider my work open code. I like to share it for free with as many people as possible. So I write for, whether it's Harvard Business Review, I just had an article published there today, Fast Company, whether I do it through my presentations. At work, people have asked me to sort of be an in-house resource, almost to have business hours where they can come to me. So I'm always sharing it. I'm sharing it on Twitter at The Joel Truth, pumping out ideas. So if I have any kind of vision, it's really about scope. I want to reach more and more people with these ideas because I want them to champion their points. We're not in competition with each other. Everyone could be championing strong points to their benefit without stealing from someone else. So why shouldn't we all be the best champions of our points that we can be?
Excellent, excellent. So you mentioned your books. So what has been the book that's had the biggest impact on you? That
I've read. I'm going to look back in my library, and I'm going to pick a recent book here. Let's see if I can stretch and get it. A friend of mine named April Rinn wrote this book called Flux, 8 Superpowers for Thriving in Constant Change. And she talks about how we need to embrace changes and embrace challenges in order to best leverage them, not fear them, which can kind of disable our ability to deal with them. But whenever I look at a book like April's books or any of the leadership books that I'm constantly reviewing, I always look at it through a communication lens. All right, here's some great ideas. Now, again, leaders are not using telepathy. They're not writing books and handing them out. They are communicating. Now, they're communicating through videos, through posts, through chats, through email, through speeches. Let's look at all of these avenues and consider the best one to convey this idea. Just today, I worked with a CEO, and she wanted to congratulate a team on their success. And one of the first questions we asked was, should she write this out in an email to staff, or should she create a video? And instead of throwing a dart at a dartboard, we recognized that a video has less detail, less complicated expressions, but it has more engagement. So basically, if it's brief, if it's congratulatory, if you just want to say one or two things, the video is more effective. But if it's complicated and you want to get into strategy and really explain and refer to things and link out to things, then it's best in an email. Because in an email, people have time to read it, stop, pause, reread, put it away, come back to it. In a video, or especially in a live speech, they don't. So we should look at all the communication avenues available to us. And any leadership book that comes out, whether I like it or don't, I'm always thinking of how is the leader going to communicate and convey this to their people in a way that has impact.
Excellent, excellent. So if people listening to this today, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people that are having those aha moments, because I certainly have while we've been talking, how can people connect with you or purchase your books?
So my books are available in all the places you get books. The books are called Get to the Point and the Language of Leadership. And the best way you can find out about my ideas, you could see my writing for magazines or learn more about the books, is to go to www.joelschwartzberg.net. That's JoelSchwartzberg, joelschwartzberg.net. But if that's a lot to remember now, you can find me on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there. But I love sharing ideas on Twitter because I love it proves that you're doing less is more and more is less because you only have that short space. So yeah, I encourage people to follow me at the Joel Truth on Twitter.
Excellent. And we'll have all of those links in the show notes. Joel, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for investing in today's leaders.
Thank you so much, Tony. It was a pleasure.